Hey now, so while the weather is still cooperating enough that I can ferment lagers in my garage easily, I figured I would try to crank out one more lager for the season, and that's going to be a Schwarzbeer. Now this is actually my first time brewing one of them, and I'm really excited to give it a try. And what I'm looking for here is something with just a little bit of rich maltiness. We're going to get that out of some Weyermann Munich malt. There's going to be just some smooth roastiness and kind of finishing, hopefully perceptually quite dry, just because of the roasted grains and just enough bitterness to carry it through. So let's take a look at the grist. So the majority of this grist is Weyermann Pilsner malt, and that's 62.5%. And then I also have 30% Munich malt, and that's where I'm hoping to get just a little bit of that rich maltiness to balance out with that nice grainy Pilsner malt. And then for my dark malts, I've got some Carafa Special III here, as well as Midnight Wheat Malt, and I'm splitting this 50-50, so that's going to total 7.5% of the grist. So let's get it milled up. So I'm going to mill this up using my Monster Mill 3mm Pro, which will make short work of this. There we are. Take a couple of minutes and we'll be ready to mash in. Alright, so my strike water is ready here. It's sitting at 52 Celsius. My target is to go for 50 Celsius or right around 125 Fahrenheit. Do a nice little protein rest here. I like to do that anytime I'm making a beer that has that Weyermann Pilsner malt. I find that it really helps out with those beers and their eventual clarity and whatnot. So give this a really nice stir. Make sure there are no clumps. This is where it's already starting to get dark. Nice. In the software, this is calculating this at around 26 SRM for the finished product. So, should be nice and Schwarz. All right, so I will just get this lock line down there, and we'll start to recirculate. All right, so I just got that pump on for the recirculation here, doing the mash. You can see that's already a really nice brown color. I'm sure that will darken up quite a bit. Yeah, and so I'm going to give it probably 20 or so minutes here at this temperature. Well, like I said, partway through this protein rest, look how black that is. That's fantastic. So after that 20 minutes at 122 Fahrenheit or 50 Celsius, I am now taking it up to 64.4 Celsius or 148 Fahrenheit, and we will do the majority of our mash at that temperature. So it'll be around an hour at that temp. So after that 1 hour mash, I have stepped up here to 67.7 Celsius or 154 Fahrenheit, just to do a little bit more of an alpha rest on this. I'm going for max attenuability, just to make sure that this isn't too thick or sweet in the finished product. So I'll let it sit here for maybe about 10 minutes. So after holding it 75 Celsius or around that 168 temperature there for 15 minutes, I am beginning the fly sparge. So I'm running off into the boil kettle, and I've got this 75.5 Celsius water being added to the mash tun. Well, I got about 15 liters in that boil kettle, so it is time to flame on. Well, we're just hitting a boil here. I'm going for a 10-gallon batch, so I started off with around 52 liters here in the boil kettle, and I'm going to have a 90-minute boil because I want to reduce any potential DMS issues in the finished beer because of that high percentage of Pilsner malt in the base. And we're going to be adding the first hops at 60 minutes, so I'm going to let it boil for half an hour before we do anything. So for bittering, we're going with 32 grams of 12% Magnum, and that's going to be the bulk of our IBU contribution here to this beer. There are going to be some more hops at 15, but this is where most of that's coming from. So while I've got a little bit of time before my 15-minute hop edition, I'm just transferring these German Pilsners. I'm going to be fermenting the Schwarzbeer on this Escarpment Biergarten yeast cake on here. These pills hit terminal gravity several days ago, and I've just been cooling them down, and there's still some yeast in there, which is nice because I can continue to lager these if I want in kegs, but it'll be some really nice, happy, healthy yeast pitches for these Schwarzbiers. So with 15 minutes left here, I'm going to add 28 grams of Saaz hops at 3.9%, so that's going to give me the last 3 IBU that I need for that total of 26 that I've got going into this beer. All right, and we've just hit flameout, so I'm going to add these hops here, and we've got 28 grams of some nice Tettnanger, and then I'm just going to whirlpool that here, just to help establish a really nice cone in the center there of all that trub and hot matter and all that fun stuff, just to make it easier to transfer off without picking it up. There we go. And then I'm going to lid it and give it about 15 minutes, and then it'll be time to run off. So now I'm just running these beers off directly onto these yeast cakes. You can see there was very little actual Pilsner left in there. Not enough to really influence the flavor at all. If anything, it would possibly jack the bitterness just the smallest amount. I've left my heat wraps and everything still attached. Basically, the plan here is just to get these filled up and hooked back up, make sure the temperature is where I want it to be and everything right away, and they should be good to go. Well, I hit 1052 as an original gravity on this, so I am super excited to see how it turns out. And here we go. These carboys are both set up. They're sitting at 55 Fahrenheit, and I really roused them up nicely to kick all that yeast up into suspension. And I'm waiting for fermentation to kick off. Well, the next morning I would say that these fermentations are quite happy. They're coming along very nicely. Yeah, awesome. So I'm currently in the middle of pressure racking this Schwarzbeer. So after almost a week in the mid 60s Fahrenheit, just to ensure we were going to hit terminal gravity, and then slowly ramping down and letting sit for a week at about 49 Fahrenheit, which really let a bunch of that yeast sort of crash out. I am transferring here. Our finishing gravity came in at 1016, which matched the forced attenuation test. So it's right at the high end for the style, but that's totally fine. It'll have a little bit more body and should be nice and delicious. So after this transfer into this keg, I'm going to chill it down. I'm going to gelatin fine it, give it at least a week just to clarify as much as possible, and then we'll be able to transfer again into a new keg and carbonate. If you want to see all those processes in detail, make sure to check out the Brewing playlist on the channel. So after some patience, letting the Schwarzbier clarify and then carbonating it and getting it on tap here, it is time to taste. Well, here we are. This is a pretty beer. Pretty black beer. This is crazy. Very much opaque. Held up to the light, you can see that it is clear for sure. Everything dropped out really nicely, but it's just so dark that unless you're holding it up to the light, it's impossible to see through it. Nice little tan head on there. Super, super fun. It's really quite cold now, but you can smell some of that gentle roast coming out of there. A little bit of toastiness too. And that's, we've got that high percentage of the 30% Munich malt in there, and then the Carafa Special III and the Midnight wheat malt. So let's see what it tastes like. Oh wow, that's super fun. So yeah, you get the graininess of the Pilsner malt, some of that little toastiness and the maltiness coming out of the Munich, a really kind of soft roast, really gentle kind of roast coming out of those dark malts, and that midnight wheat really helps with that because it's the wheat, so it adds just a little bit of softness to the beer. And considering the gravity, the finishing gravity was 1016, it drinks definitely lighter than that, and I think the roast and the graininess of those malts kind of helps create sort of like a perception of lightness that's not really there, but makes it very drinkable. And also having the lager yeast really helps with this too. Just makes a really clean beer. I think if a person were to use an ale yeast on it and you get a little bit of fruitiness and stuff in there, that would definitely enhance the perception of sweetness with this. But either way, I'm super happy with this. I'll definitely be adding this to the rotation, and I can't wait to finish this glass. So yeah, till next time, keep it at 11.